Great to see you.
Such casual clothes.
I'm acting under instruction.
Recognize you.
Welcome everybody to our another installment of Our World. This is a joint effort by the ASEAN Institute for Policy Studies and the Educational Broadcasting System to invite ambassadors from various countries to present their view on their country, and of course, also on the relationship with Korea. Britain, I think, everybody knows quite a bit about Britain. For me, it's the land of Beatles, Rolling Stones, The Who, but it's also a land of Shakespeare. But I look forward to learning more from you. So thank you for doing this today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ham. It's a real pleasure for me to be here at the ASEAN Institute. It's an institute with which our embassy here in Seoul works very closely. And I've been able to observe in the 3 years that I've been ambassador here how important a role the ASEAN Institute plays in stimulating innovative thinking in foreign policy development and in thinking about Korea's place in Northeast Asia, its wider place in the Asian region and in the world. And it's very important that we develop exchanges between institutes like the ASEAN and think tanks in the United Kingdom. The 3 years that I've been ambassador have been, I would argue, perhaps the best time ever to be British ambassador here in Korea. We've seen the relationship develop across the full range of economic, security, educational and cultural relations. A high point was when President Park Geun-hye paid her state visit to the United Kingdom last November. Some of you may have seen elements of that on the television here, broadcast on the television. And it was a tremendous opportunity for us both to take stock of the very close relationship that's developed between our two countries now, a relationship that's based on shared economic and shared political values, but also to think about how we want to see the relationship developing in the future. And we were able to use the state visit and the presence of President Park in London to identify new areas for collaboration and new areas for working together in the next 5 to 10 years. And I'm very excited about the prospects for the bilateral relationship. And we're seeing that in action as we speak, because very shortly a team of Korean health workers will deploy to Sierra Leone to fight this terrible epidemic of Ebola. And they will be working right alongside British health workers and British military personnel in Sierra Leone, working hand in hand in the same medical units. And I think it's a great example of the way in which our countries are working together in a new area of challenge on the international security agenda. But today, what I really want to focus on are 3 elements of modern Britain. They are the innovation that you see in modern Britain, the creativity that you see in modern Britain, and also the way in which it's important that we draw on our diverse talents. So that's where I want to try and focus my presentation. And I'm going to be illustrating that by looking at 4 individuals. 2 of them are British people, 1 dead, 1 alive. And I just want at the end as well to look at 2 Korean citizens, both of them very much alive, and I think very good examples of modern Korea. But before making the presentation, we're going to start with just a little video that encapsulates 250 years of Britain's contribution to global innovation. So these are some of the examples of great British innovation over the last 250 years. And there are many British innovators that I could have selected to illustrate what I want to encapsulate in terms of Britain's innovation. I could have chosen James Watt, a great Scottish engineer who designed the first steam engine and arguably was the father of the Industrial Revolution. I could have selected one of these three great engineers who revolutionized transport. On the left there, George Stephenson, who built the world's first rail steam engine. In the middle, Isambard Kingdom Brunel, who built the world's first steamship and revolutionized maritime transport. Or here, Frank Whipple, who in the 20th century designed and invented the first jet engine and revolutionized air transport. I could have chosen one of these three great engineers and inventors who had a revolutionary impact on global communications. Alexander Graham Bell, who invented the telephone. Or John Logie Baird, another Scottish engineer who invented the television. Or Tim Berners-Lee, who in the 1990s was the architect of the World Wide Web. All three of them having a massive impact on global communications. Or indeed I could have gone for one of these great life scientists, Alexander Fleming, who discovered penicillin and had a huge impact on health, public health. Or Francis Crick, one of the three people who discovered the double helix and as a consequence unlocked human understanding of DNA and revolutionized biotechnology, created the science of biotechnology, if you like, in the 1950s. So many, many great innovators. But the one that I want to focus on today is somebody who's less well known to you, but who will become better known, I think, around the world shortly, because a film about his life will shortly be released and I think will be available to be seen in cinemas here in Korea as well. I'm talking about the father of computing, a man called Alan Turing, somebody whom perhaps you've never heard of. Turing was born in England in the early years of the 20th century. He was a really brilliant mathematician, brilliant in the way that none of us could possibly begin to understand. He went to Cambridge University in the early 1930s when he was just in his early 20s studying at Cambridge University. He wrote two seminal academic papers that have had a profound influence on modern society, a profound influence on the whole concept of computing, and arguably were the papers that established the whole science of computing. He wrote a paper on algorithms and an academic paper as well on computing machines. Now, I studied languages at university and I can't begin to understand anything to do with algorithms or much to do with computing machines. But I do know that they had a huge impact on the way in which we live our lives in the 21st century. After the Second World War, Alan Turing went to work at Manchester University, and working with a group of brilliant scientists there, not just British scientists, an international group of scientists, they developed Turing's computer. This was the world's first computer, and there you see it. And it's difficult to imagine these days that all of that hardware had much less computing capacity than the smartphone that you have in your pocket right now. But that's where it all started. It was a very, very significant technological breakthrough. But he wasn't just interested in the hardware, he was also interested in the concepts behind the softwares that powered and was to power computing. And he came up when he was at Manchester University. He was the person that first developed the concept of artificial intelligence. And that's a science that has grown, matured, and is now very real in the world today. When we read articles about ideas of robots that in the future might be able to repair themselves and do all sorts of jobs and functions that human beings carry out today, all of this can be traced back to Alan Turing. Now, these contributions to the hardware side of computing, but also to the software side of computing, those would have been enough, or should have been enough, to ensure any person's fame. But Turing ought also to be famous for another really incredible feat of logic and of engineering. In the early years of the Second World War, after the fall of France, Britain stood alone against Nazi Germany in Europe. And at that time, I'm talking about the years of 1940, 1941, German U-boats were causing tremendous damage to the supplies that were coming to the United Kingdom, the British Isles, from the United States, and which were absolutely vital to the survival and the independence and the ability of the United Kingdom and people in Britain to resist the threat of invasion from Germany. And the problem for the British authorities was that they were unable to crack the cipher code, the German cipher code, that was sending orders to these U-boats operating in the North Atlantic Ocean. And it was felt that it was absolutely essential that we should somehow find a way to crack this code. It was called the Enigma Code, if we were going to be able to resist German invasion and sustain our position during the Second World War and maintain our way of life in Britain. This here is the Enigma, one of the Enigma machines. This was one of the cipher machines that was developed by brilliant German engineers and cryptographers. And orders were passed through this machine, encrypted, and then sent to German military commanders all around Europe and operating in the seas of the North Atlantic Ocean. It looks very simple now, but it was a highly sophisticated, highly complex machine. And Turing worked with a specially selected group of brilliant thinkers at a place called Bletchley Park, which is just north of London, in the countryside north of London. And this group of brilliant mathematicians and others, they built on the work of some outstanding Polish cryptographers who had been already trying to crack the Enigma code. But Turing applied his own unique logic, and it was thanks to him and his group of associates in Bletchley Park that they finally developed what is known as the Bomba machine, this machine here. And that successfully cracked the Enigma code. It enabled British military commanders and then subsequently Allied military commanders to understand what orders were being sent to German military planners and military commanders around Europe and the North Atlantic. And through that understanding, this played an absolutely vital role in the development of the Allied forces' capability of first resisting and then eventually overcoming Nazi Germany and bringing an end to the Second World War in Europe. There are some estimates that suggest that thanks to this brilliant feat of logic and engineering from Alan Turing, he was able to shorten the war in Europe by between 2 and 4 years. And what's absolutely certain is that thanks to the work of these cryptographers working at Bletchley Park together, their success in cracking the Enigma code, tens of thousands of Allied lives in Europe were definitely saved. And the supplies kept coming through to Britain and kept us capable of fighting during the Second World War. So Alan Turing should have been one of the great British heroes of the second part of the 20th century. He's a great example, I think, of British innovation, a great example of our strength in education. But the fact is that for decades, his story was unknown. He was hidden from British society, in a sense. Why was that? Well, there's one very simple reason. Alan Turing was gay. And in the middle years of the 20th century, homosexuality was a criminal offence in the United Kingdom. And indeed, in 1952, Alan Turing was arrested and he was prosecuted for homosexual acts. He was found guilty and he was given the choice either of going to prison for 2 years or undergoing a series of estrogen injections. And he chose the second of those. He chose to undergo those estrogen injections. And this had an effect, obviously, a significant effect on him. And because of the criminal prosecution, it meant that he was considered by the British authorities to be a security risk. And consequently, the work that he had continued to be engaged in on cryptography, very important work in the Allied, in NATO's response to the threat from the Soviet Union during the Cold War. He had to stop that work. He had to withdraw from all of that work. 2 years later, at the age of 42, very, very sadly, Alan Turing died. He was found dead in his flat. It was thought at the time that he had committed suicide through cyanide poisoning. Now it's thought that perhaps it was just an unfortunate accident, that he'd been working with some chemicals in his room and the combination of these noxious chemicals had unintentionally led to his death. But whether it was suicide or whether he died just of an accident, the fact is that Britain as a nation, in the end, was not able fully to exploit and benefit from the great talents and the original innovative thinking of Alan Turing. The second person I want to talk to you about this afternoon is, I think, a great example of British creativity. This is a woman who, in the early 1990s, was a single mother. She lived very close to the poverty line on state benefits following the collapse of her marriage. But this was a woman with a really interesting idea. And she wrote and developed her idea in a coffee shop in the city of Edinburgh. I'm not sure if you can see this coffee shop here. It's called the Elephant House. It still is there if you want to visit it in Edinburgh. And this is the view from inside the coffee shop out to Edinburgh Castle. And this woman, while she was writing down her idea and developing her idea and drinking her coffee, this was the view that she looked out on. And these are some of the other buildings in the city of Edinburgh, which happens to be my hometown, that she would have seen on a daily basis. A couple of schools in Edinburgh. This Fettes College is actually where Tony Blair went to school, and James Bond was supposed to have gone to school there as well. And personally, I don't think or at least I see in those rather dramatic buildings, the castle, these schools, I see the outline of Hogwarts. And of course, the person I'm talking about is the creator of Harry Potter, J.K. Rowling. Joanne Rowling's extraordinary imagination conjured up a world that's enchanted millions of children around the world. And I think she's a fantastic example of commitment to an idea and also of refusal to buckle and to bend in the face of adversity. It took her 7 years from the point at which she had the first idea of a school for wizards to the completion of the first in the Harry Potter series, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. And it was 10 years later when she finally completed the 7th book in the series, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. And I'm sure that there are many of you out there who've read every one of those books. I haven't, but my girls have. The Harry Potter books have become the best-selling series of books in history, with over 400 million copies sold around the world. But I think it's rather interesting to note that she chose, or she was advised by her publishers, to publish under the name J.K. Rowling, not her own name of Joanne Rowling. And the reason for that was because her publishers feared that young boys, who were the target audience of the book, wouldn't be interested in reading a book written by a woman. I think it's also worth reflecting that had she lived at the same time as Alan Turing had lived, been at work in the middle of the 20th century, then her prospects as a single mother in the United Kingdom would have been really very bleak. I mean, it's true to say still that in the United Kingdom, life can be very hard for single mothers, but there's no doubt that social attitudes in our country have changed a lot in the last 20 or 30 years in that respect. I think we understand much better now that if we are to succeed economically in the United Kingdom, it's absolutely vital that we harness the talents of all of our people, whatever their background, wherever they come from. And so single mothers in the United Kingdom are no longer stigmatized. They're a full part of society. But of course, the Harry Potter story isn't just about the books. Thanks to the strength of the British film industry, Harry Potter has become the most successful series, film franchise series in cinematic history as well. And that's partly due to the great plots that J.K. Rowling elaborated in the books, and also to a great group of very talented British actors. But I think it's also thanks to some of the real strengths of the British film industry. If you go to some of the film studios in Southeast England or in Northern Ireland, you will find the most advanced CGX, computer graphics capability and technology in any film studio around the world. And as a consequence of that, that you're able to see Harry Potter flying around on his broomstick and playing Quidditch and all of the other great things that they do in the Harry Potter films. It's a consequence of those great CGX technologies that the Game of Thrones television series is filmed in Northern Ireland. It's all because of these real great strengths in the British film industry. Why are we so strong in these sorts of areas? Why are we so innovative and creative? I think it's a mixture of Britain's openness to new ideas. I think it's partly our very diverse population now in the United Kingdom. It's partly our world-class universities. And I think it's also to do with the very supportive business environment that we've tried to create in the United Kingdom. And all of that's combined, I think, to make the United Kingdom now one of the world's really great hubs of creativity. So there we have it, some strengths, somebody who really encapsulates, I think, the spirit of great British innovation, and another person who encapsulates the strengths of British creativity. Both of them, in some way, outsiders in society, both of them demonstrating that for success, it's very important that we draw on diverse talents.